Chapter 4, Dynasties 13 through 17. The tablet of Abydos passes at once from the 12th to the 18th dynasty, places Imhotep, the first king, immediately after the princess Sebek Neferura. The traditions of the ancients concerning this obscure period lead but to confusion and error, and the Turin Papyrus, the only such document which could serve as a guide, has such frightful gaps where the list of the 13th dynasty kings should be, that it is practically useless. Fate has thus done its worst to place the greatest difficulties in the way of the solution of this question. All that scientific research has succeeded in attaining is the well-grounded belief that long after the conclusion of the 12th dynasty, native kings ruled with unlimited power. Well, that's overstretching it with a way of expressing that, but in the land until princes of foreign origin already settled in the eastern lowlands gradually drove back the old race so as to establish the right of conquest over the true heirs of the throne. Before narrating the history of these foreign conquerors, it would be advisable to give here the succession of the Egyptian dynasties, the number of their kings, and the time of their total duration, according to the Manethonian sources, and on the authority of the best and most recent researches. You know, this is 1902. Maybe there's been some change in established opinion or reasons for such, which comment and question. That's what this is for. The 13th dynasty of Thebes had 60 kings and was 453 years. The 14th of Khois, 76 kings and 484 years. The 15th of the Hyksos had 6 kings and was 260 years. The 16th of the Hyksos was 251 years. The 17th of Thebes, how many kings and how many years, kind of not known. At the time of writing, at the time of Heinrich Brugsch-Bey, without stopping to examine and establish the numbers extant and missing, it may be confidentially assumed that science can scarcely be mistaken in arranging the present lists and periods in the following order: the legitimate kings of the Theban race, the 13th dynasty, 60 kings, 453 years. The 17th, unknown kings and years. Opposition kings of Khois, the 14th dynasty of Khois, 76 kings, 484 years. Foreign conquerors, the 15th dynasty of the Hyksos, 6 kings and 260 years. The 16th dynasty, unknown number of kings, but 251 years. A glance at the mutilated fragments of the Turin Papyrus will establish the fact that the last 5 columns were devoted to the kings who belonged to the foreign dynasties of Anato. Their total number in the papyrus may be estimated at about 150 names, and the numbers which have been preserved here and there as giving the lengths of reigns of single kings seldom exceed 3 or 4 years. From this it appears probable that the history of Egypt at this period consisted chiefly of revolts and assassinations, in consequence of which the lengths of the kings' reigns were not governed by ordinary conditions of the duration of human existence. These were the times concerning which Ramses III, Masul, is that how you say it? Remarks the Harris Papyrus in the British Museum that the land of Tzetmet was in the hands of the princes of the cities of foreigners, of whom the one neighbor killed the other neighbor. The kings who immediately followed the pharaohs of the 12th dynasty were in full possession of Upper and Lower Egypt. For a long time, the opinion was prevalent that the 13th dynasty marked the exact epoch of the invasion of the foreigners. So that these latter must have already gained a firm footing in Lower Egypt and the East. In opposition to this, however, is the fact that several kings of the 13th dynasty enjoyed in the Delta perfect leisure and quiet to erect monuments, the remains of which have been preserved to the present time, and whose size and style do not point to their having been hastily constructed. Among these may be mentioned the wonderful stones and statues at Tanis, Zoan, in the neighborhood of the territory on which, toward the end of the 13th dynasty, the Hyksos kings pitched their camps, and the extracts of the from Manetho. The names of the kings of the 13th dynasty are passed over in silence. The Turin Papyrus is, therefore, the only source from which the void can be supplied. Unfortunately, the extant fragments are just sufficient to establish some of the most important names. True to the ancient custom, nearly all the royal persons are distinguished by means of the official name only. The family names are, however, supplied in the case of no small number of the princes of the dynasty by the contemporary monuments, which bear double cartouches and show that the greater number of these kings bore the name of Sepik-Hateptep. And look at that crocodile sitting on his throne. Oh, yeah. Notwithstanding the Theban origin of the race, the 7 Sepik-Hatepteps, I don't know the plural, the servants of Sebek, held in special veneration the crocodile-headed entity to whom the kings of the preceding dynasty had raised monuments in the Fayum and in the neighboring of the Lake Moeris. An intimate connection must therefore be supposed between the 12th and 13th dynasties. It is probable that the Sebek Nefru Ra, the Harris of the 12th dynasty, transmitted the special worship of that entity to her son. For as much as we recognize Ra, Xu, Ta'u, the protecting son of the double land, and we got that cartouche, whom the Turin Papyrus places at the head of the 13th dynasty, the name Sepik-Hateptep constantly appears until the commencement of the 18th dynasty. Now, the crocodile, if you're going to connect it to other cultures, is kind of like the 7 chakras. The cutting of the first 6 Sephira. You remember that Book of the Dead? Bites right above the bottom 6 spheres are the of the Tree of Life, out of 10 or out of 11, and are the bottom 3 spheres of the the chakra system. So we've gone, the marriage and pilgrimage, that's taken care of, and you got the the social. You're liberated from there being reasons for society to condemn you. It's basically one of the things that entity can represent. The following table of the kings who succeeded Sepik-Hateptep the first is drawn up from the extant fragment of the Turin Papyrus. These pharaohs belonged to the 13th dynasty, which, according to Manetho, was composed of 60 names. It is possible that he made a selection from about 140 kings who at any rate are certified on the authority of the papyrus. The 13th dynasty, according to the Turin Papyrus, is first Ra-Xu Ta'u, Sepik-Hateptep the first. You got Seksem Ka Ra, Then you have Ra Ibn Nimhat the first. You have Sahatap Yibra the first. Othni. The sixth is Sunk Yibra. The seventh is Smen Ka-Ra. The eighth is Sahatap Yibra the second. The ninth is Ka-Ra. And one or two names has been destroyed. They don't know how many. Nachum Yibra. And then Ra Sabak Hatap the second. The 13th is Ron Senab, perhaps. Then you have Utu Yibra the first. Then you have Setef Ra. Then you have Ra Saksam Tsu Ta'u. Sabak Hatap the third. Ra Usur. Smekska Ra Metamesha. Then you have something that ends in Ka Ra. Then you have something Usur. And then you have for the 21st, Ra Saksam or Sutawi. Sabak Hatap the fourth. The 22nd is Ka Thasheshra Nefer Hatap. So he was the son of a Ha Anksap. The 23rd is Ra Sehatar. The 24th is Sa Nefer Ra Spak Hatap. The 5th. Then you have Ka-Ra. Then you have Ka-Ax-Ra. Sabak Hatap. The 6th. Ka-Hatap Ra. Or Sabak Hatap. The 7th. And so that was, he rolled for 4 years, 8 months, and 29 days. The 28th, Uwa Yibra A'a, who rolled for 10 years, 8 months, and 18 days. Mer Nefer Ra A'e, probably A, 13 years, 8 months, 18 days. Marahatap Ra, 2 years, 2 months, 9 days. Saks Ra Utu, 3 years, 2 months, unknown number of days. Mer Saksam Ra Anran, 3 years, 1 month, unknown number of days. Daksker Ra, unknown, and Ura, and some unknown. Oh wait, no, not unknown to go. Never mind. 5 years, unknown number of months, but 8 days. Anemem, some gap in row. 35 through 43, 9 or 10 names are destroyed. 44. Merkseper Ra, 45, Merka Ra, 46 through 50 are destroyed. 51 only has Mus. 52, Ra, something with Ma'at, Abba. 53, unknown how it starts, but Ra, Ubin, the first. 54 through 57 is destroyed. Nahasi Ra, No years, but some months and 3 days. Ka Kru Ra, unknown number of years, unknown number of months, 3 days. Napeth up to Ra, 2 years, 5 months, 15 days. Saheb Ra, 3 years, unknown number of months, unknown number of days. Mer Tepa Ra, 3 years, unknown number of months, unknown number of days. Tatka Ra, 1 year, unknown number of months, unknown number of days. Neb Tepa Ra, 1 year, unknown number of months, unknown number of days. Ra Upen, second. No years, unknown number of months, unknown number of days. And 66 through 87, unknown number of days, but 66 and 67 are destroyed names. 68 ends in Tefa Ra. 69 ends in Ra Upen, the third. 70, Utu Yibra, the second. 71, Har Upra. 72, Nepsin Ra. 73 through 76 are destroyed, or effaced is probably how I would put it, but 77, Saxper Ra. 78, Taxaru Ra. 79, Sanskar Ra. 80, Nefertum Ra. 81, Sekhem Ra. 82, Ka Ra. So 82, there's some gap in the middle of the name. 84 and 87 at the end. 83 is Nefer Yibra. 84, Ra something. 85, Ra Ka. 86, Nutka Ra. 87, Smen, and onwards. Unfortunately, almost all the names are in such a mutilated condition that they do not admit of transcription, and still less of any proper comparison with those on other monuments. One particularity may be mentioned, which is that they sometimes begin with Saksum and sometimes with Usr, to the names which manifestly belong to a destroyed part of the foregoing table must be added another Sebek Hatap, the sixth, Ra Ka-Anks, and who is inserted in his proper place with help of the table from the Hall of the Ancestors. The most important monuments of the 13th dynasty in sequence of time are, first, the accompanying genealogical table compiled from a number of inscriptions and containing family records which will give an idea of the descent of certain kings from persons not of pharaonic birth and of their entrance into the royal circle by marriage with the princess as the queen Nabkas in the 4th generation. In the table on the next page furnishes a good example, and so we'll go over that before we take a break here. Among the records of individual sovereigns of this period are 2 inscriptions at the extreme limits of the Nubian country. In the one case on the rocky islands of the first cataract in the neighborhood of Phila, on the other at Semna and Kumme about the second cataract. At the latter place, Sebek Hatap, the third, following the example of his predecessors, engraved a record of the highest point to which the inundation of the Nile reached in his day. It reads simply, height of the Nile in the 3rd year under the reign of King Sebek Hatap the third, the ever-living. The Ra Seneb, a distinguished courtier and commandant of the fortress of Seksem Kaka Ra, founded by Urtsurtsin, governed in those days the south portion of the newly conquered country, and thus possessed the right to place his name by the side of his royal master. So the succession of the generations, we have Mentuhotep, Hut Abu, was called Father of the Divine One, with Mother of the King giving birth to Nena. Sebek Hatep the fourth was the king of that queen, and Seneb, Nebatef. Oh, Seneb was the prince, and Nebatef was the thing. And so from the third generation there, we have Ahat Abu, the prince regent, and Tatat was the princess. And we have Sebek Hatep, Ahat Abu, Hent, Mentuhotep on the other from the other marriage. And from an unknown marriage, we have Neb Anks, which is head of the 30, Sebek Tat Baba, who with Tual Nefert, the child of Hamu, Damina, gave birth to Nubkas, the queen, Nepu, Damina, Sebek Nefru, Nebet Nub, Nub Khu, Nub Heb, Neb Unks, Sebek Sauf, Sebek Hatep, Sebek Hat, Nebsu. And Nubkas, the queen, connects to Sebek Hatep from this other line here. So we're going to have to go back 2 generations from this 4th generation to the 2nd generation. So we have Ha Anksef, meaning Father of the Divine One, with Kama, Mother of the King. And their children were Sebek Hatep the 4th, Nefer Hatep, who was also king. Nebanks to Nepsu from the 4th generation, they weren't kings. But yeah, we're looking at all queens from this one family here, kings and queens. Neferhotep was a king, Snebsen was the queen. And then we're going on to this 4th dynasty, which Sa-Hatar was a prince and then a king. Sebek-Hatep was a prince and then a king. Ha-Anksef and Kama, prince and princess. Neb-Anks was a royal grandchild, but Sebek-Hatep, 6th queen, with Nub-Kas, gave birth to the children Tuat Nefert, Babaris, and Ae, and Kansu Khunes, the princess, the governor of Eilaithia, but they gave birth to Ron Seneb. And so we have another, 6th generation here. Neferhotep, Spec next. Neferhotep, Spec next. Spec next. Snebab, Spec next. Spec next. Ron Seneb, Spec next. And one of the Spec next here with Neferhotep for the further generation here, the 7th generation. Spec next, Ab-a-a, Snebsen. And we have Sir and Sebek-Hatep the 4th, 20 and 21. 22, Nefer-Hatep, 24, Sebek-Hatep the 5th. The 25th was Ka-Ra. The 23rd was Sa-Hatter. The 27th, Sebek-Hatep the 4th, the 6th, Sebek-Hatep the 7th. The 28th, Ab, and 29a. So that's where some of those kings come from. The 18th king, Smenkhkara, with the family name of Mer Masha, leader of the armies, claims special attention because Marietta discovered at Tanis 2 wonderfully perfect colossal statues of the king, in both of which his names were clearly legible. They were originally erected in the temple of Ptah Tanis, the Hyksos prince. Appa. Apepi, as well as Ra-Musu II, about 400 years later, immortalized themselves by cutting their own names on this monument. Spuk-Hatep IV, the son of Mentu-Hatep, must have been in possession of the lowlands of the Nile Valley, for his statues in granite are found at Tanis, which proves that neither this city nor the country adjacent to it on the east was occupied by enemies. The same fact is made clear from the discovery at Bubastis of a statue of Spuk-Hatep V, whose memory was also preserved beyond the boundary of Semneh and Kumneh by another statue on the island of Argo. The power of the kings of the 13th dynasty was therefore neither reduced in the south nor in the north of the empire. Records of the times of the same kings have been unmistakably preserved in the heart of Egypt itself, Thebes, Abydos, and the rocky valley of Hammamat are rich in proofs of the undiminished power of the empire, and the museums of Europe contain many monuments of this dynasty, notably the memorial stone at Leiden, which Spek-Hatep dedicated to Har-Amsu next, who is thought to be a god of Panopolis, a group of kings beginning with Spek-Hatep III and finishing with Spek-Hatep VII. Spek-Hatep. These transliterations, and I don't always remember them all when I come back, right? Are connected with the most distinguished families of the country and form a separate series of 13th dynasty sovereigns. As proof of this may be cited the much discussed but little understood representation in the Hall of Ancestors. As is well known, this relates to a section of kings who received a place in a chamber devoted to them by Jahutmus III. The right side of the hall shows the portraits and names of the Theban princes of the 13th dynasty, but only in a selection of meaning of which is at once evident. The first ends in Ka. This is a table of the chamber Karnak compared with the Papyrus of Turin. 2, Suten Ra 3, Sanks Ibra 4, Ra Suksum Ku Ta'u 5, Ra Suksum Tat Ta'u 6, Ka Sashash Ra 7, Ka Nefer Ra 8, Ka Ra 9, Ka Ats Ra Spek-Hatep the 6th, 10, Ka-Hatep Ra, and we see number 6, Sanks Ibra. Oh, we see 2 number 6s listed here. Okay. 16 is Spek-Hatep III, which is connected. Which is connected to number 4. We have Spek-Hatep IV, which 21 and 5 is listed here. So 6 and 22, Nefer-Hatep, 7 and 24, Spek-Hatep IV, 25 destroyed, but Ka-Ra, 26 destroyed, Spek-Hatep the 6th, 27 is lining up here with 10 here, Spek-Hatep the 7th, for it appears to contain only the names of those kings whose importance is confirmed by contemporary inscriptions, while the rest of the names mentioned in the Turin Papyrus are passed over in silence. Among these princes is Ra, Ka, Muri, known to us from the wall of the rock-hewn tomb. Yeah, see, got that one wrong. They got that one wrong again. Well, I know they're trying to simplify it, but known to us from the wall of the rock-hewn tomb of Tefab, the son of Khepte, on the mountain behind Aseut. Tefab, according to his own account, was the governor of the south country. Although the hieroglyphs are much destroyed, it seems certain that the owner of the tomb had been commissioned by his royal master to execute certain works for the enlargement and restoration of the temple of Anpu, Anubis, the tutelary entity of the city just named. There are also indications which lead us to infer warlike events in Upper Egypt. The tombs of Aseut, Lycopolis, all point to a common origin. The times of the 12th and 13th dynasties, the most valuable historically is that of Ta'afa-Hup, commonly called the Stabal Antar, who was high priest of Yinpu and filled a number of other offices at the royal court. The interior wall facing the entrance of the sepulchral hall contains long and fairly well-preserved inscriptions. After the deceased has set forth his various titles and offices, and has extolled the way in which he fulfilled his duties towards what are considered to be gods and men, which he calls upon the future priestly guardian of his grave to care for him, the deceased, as he in his lifetime had cared for the entities in Seut, Lycopolis. He also takes this occasion for fixing the kind and number of the sacrifices, mentioning the feast days on which they are to be offered, and gives evidence for the first time in an Egyptian inscription that the inhabitants of the Nile Valley were accustomed to dedicate the first fruits of their harvest to what they considered to be a deity. Now, I can connect to the energy, the memory, and the legacy without worshiping the dead, but the ancient Egyptians believed that that one of the aspects of the self is the name. So by mentioning the names of the dead and bringing the memory of their monuments, it's continuing part of them, right? To a degree that if anybody who's doing that sort of thing didn't, then there's a reduction in the run. The feasts named in this inscription took place at the beginning of the year. The inscriptions which adorned the walls of the rock chambers of these tombs, as well as those of Al-Kab, the ancient Isle Apolis. Okay, where's the Egyptian one, right? Well, I mean, that's the Greek. All point to their belonging to the 13th dynasty, quite apart from the identity and style, and from the prince and the presence of the cartouche of Sfakhatep IV. Okay, yeah. Ra, Suksum, Satat, Ta'u, which is found in one of the tombs of this place, whose former tenant bore the name of Sibak Nuxt. The proper names which belong to the dead certainly point in the most unmistakable way to this period. And let's see the characters there. Ra, Suksum, Sa, Tut. Okay. I guess that's in 1887, Mr. LL, what does LL abbreviate to? Griffith made a careful survey of the tombs at Aseut and discovered in a large scene in the Great Hall, now unfortunately much obliterated, the owner of the grotto in adoration before the cartouche of Usertsen I, thus fixing the date at the 12th dynasty. Moreover, from the inscriptions in the tombs of Xeti I to Ephabah and Xeti II, it is clear that the princes of Heracleopolis were extremely hostile to the Theban lords, and that the magnates of Seut sided with the former. For further information, see Babylon and Oriental Record, Volume 3, page 121, 164, 174, 244. A splendid translation of an inscription in the tomb of Ephabah was made by Professor Erman in the Zeitschrift for 1882, and another by Maspero was published in translation of Society of Archaeology, Volume 2, page 12, in sequence. Semiticism in Egypt, in opposition to the kings of the 13th dynasty of Theban origin, were, according to Manetho, 76 pharaohs who fixed their royal abode in Xois. These internal schisms, promoted by the ambitious plans of sovereigns both of Upper and Lower Egypt, give us the key to the long silence of the contemporary monuments and to the full understanding of the success of an invasion which brought a foreign race into Egypt who would never have dared to oppose the armed might of the United Empire. The 10th dynasty was Heracleopolitan. Okay. The sovereigns of this period had something else to do than to think of constructing monuments to the divinities of the country, and the high functionaries saw their masters change too often to have confidence in the stability of the state and to occupy themselves with hewing out in the mountain rock those funerary chapels, witnesses to the glory and riches which permitted men to devote themselves at their leisure to these peaceful labors. And this is what the French edition says. Before reviewing the time of this foreign dominion, during which the old native kings sank into the position of simple governors of nomes, it is necessary to examine carefully the countries which were to be the scenes of future events, and to direct particular attention to the tribes by which these regions were peopled. In the lowlands, the inhabitants between the branches of the Nile were, for the most part, of pure Egyptian race. Those of the western or Libyan adjacent lands belong to the light-colored Tahan, and further westward to the races of the Lebu and Tamahu. The wanderings of these restless migratory groups of tribes extended northwards as far as Lake Tritonis at the bottom of the Lesser Syrtis, and eastward to the canopic branch of the Nile, called in the cuneiform inscriptions Carbenet. In this direction, near a branch of the Nile which bore its name, lay Ta'an, known as Zoan, called also Zar, and in the plural Zaru, the city of Zars, are forts. The name Tamnis, which was given to it by the Greeks, is to be referred back to the Egyptian word Ta'an. It is everywhere designated in the inscriptions as an essentially foreign town, the inhabitants of which are mentioned as the peoples in the eastern borderland. This eastern borderland is frequently spoken of as Tamazur, that is, the fortified land, in which may easily be recognized the original form of the Hebrew name for Egypt, Mazor, or Mitzrayim. On the granite memorial stone of Ramses II, discovered in Tanis, There appears a commandment of the fortress czar, who besides this office held also the dignity of the commander of the foreign peoples, a reference doubtless to the inhabitants of foreign origin in that part of the Egyptian delta. The papyri frequently allude to this city by name, adding also another appellation, Pa Ramesu, the city of Ramses, identified by Neville with Thacus, laying east of the Tanite nome, was the eighth Ar-Sethroit, whose capital bore the name of Pa-Temu, the city of Temu, the Pithom of the Bible. The town formed the central point of a district, the name of which is the foreign origin for Thuku or Sukkoth, a Semitic word signifying a tent or camp. This was pasture land and the property of Pharaoh, and on it the wandering Badawi of the eastern deserts pitched their tents in order to procure necessary food for their cattle. Here the Israelites first encamped at the time of the Exodus, moving on the second day to a place called Etham, which was either in the country of Sukkoth or in its close neighborhood. It is the place called in various Hieratic papyri, Kitam, the meaning of which, a shut-up place, fortress, completely agrees with the Hebrew Atham. The same Sethroit nome lay without doubt the town of Ha-Uar. Okay, how do you say this? Hut Uar. Okay, there's a T at the end though. Hut Uart. Hut per Uart. The house of the leg. The avarice of Manetho, a town which in Hyksos days became so celebrated. See that variation of the terms there. It was on the east of the Palusiac arm of the Nile and appears to have been connected with the river by a canal. The gradual silting up of the ancient bed of the river has made the situation of towns on its banks so difficult to determine that there is scarcely a hope of finding again the site of the lost city of Avaris, but that Ha-War must be, in any case, sought in the neighborhood of a lake is evident from the inscription in the tomb of Ahmus, the navigator, at El-Kab, who relates how he was present when the Egyptian fleet was fighting the foreign enemies on the waters of Pa-Zetku, near the town of Ha-Uart. This name, also in spite of an Egyptian article, Pa, placed before it, has a Semitic appearance, and is doubtless connected with corresponding roots of that language. Another place, situated in the Sethroit nome, bears the purely Semitic name Maktol or Magdol, which is the Hebrew Migdal, town or fortress out of which the Greeks formed Magdalon. That ancient Egyptians were well acquainted with the meaning of this word is proved most conclusively by the masculine article prefixed to it, and the sign of a wall placed after it, which, when written in Egyptian characters, this Migdal of which mention is made in the description of the Exodus from Egypt and in other occasional passages in the Bible, denotes one of the most northern points of inhabited Egypt, and is identical with the heaps of debris at Tel Es Samut on the eastern side of the lake Manzella. Now, the ancient Egyptian was obviously older than the Aramea, as it was called at the time. The Hebrew of the Talmudic period is really the first time you can really call it Hebrew, or at least you have to wait till, during the Christian period. Sometimes the etymology between one language and the other is the same in regards to words. Sometimes it isn't. So the list of defenses which were intended to protect the country on the east is not yet closed. So further to the northeast on the western border of Lake Sirbanis was another important frontier stronghold called Anbu, that is the wall, the rampart. The Hebrews knew it as Shur, and the Greeks as To Geron, which means the fences are enclosures. Whoever traveled eastward out of Egypt was obliged to pass the walls before being allowed to enter the way of the Philistines. On his further journey, an Egyptian garrison blocked the passage through the fortress, which only opened and closed on the traveler after a previous communication from the royal authorities. Everywhere in this part of the delta were towns and fortresses, the names of which point to the original Semitic colonists. There was Anu or On, Heliopolis, the original meaning of which seems to have been stone or stone pillars. Then, in the neighborhood of Mendes, was a fortified place called the Fortress of Azba, idol, or the last part of which name does not belong to the Egyptian but to the Semitic tongue. Another town on the east side of the delta bore the name of Elas, Belbais, the Semitic origin of which is made clear by its evident relationship with the Hebrew Balas, the large sycamore. It's kind of fig tree, I guess. In the neighborhood was the lake Shakana, the meaning of which is only explained by the root shakan, to settle down, to dwell, to be neighbor to. More inland was the town of Kahani, a name which at once recalls the Hebrew Kohen. Kohen is not just priest, it's the axis controlling priest. There are other words for priests, but yeah, you have the person for joy in the middle of the seed and the palm of the hand. Oh, I can't really show it with this, but then again, the memorial stones, coffins, and papyri found in the cemeteries all testified to Semites who were settled in the Nile Valley who had obtained the rights of citizenship, as also do they show the inclination of the people to give their children half Semitic and half Egyptian names. There were natives who bore names like the following: Aderoma, I mispronounced this first, like the following: Aderoma, Abarokaro, Baal, Mahar, Namarad, and many others, without any appearance of the slightest objection being found to their foreign character. The commercial interest, which extended from the Nile to the Euphrates, contributed to introduce into Egypt foreign expressions for productions of soil, for animals, and for works of industry, and the art that were not native, as may be shown by Sas for horse, Agalata for chariot, Kamal for camel, and Aber for particular kind of bull. The endeavor to pay court to whatever was Semitic degenerated in the time of the 19th and 20th dynasties into a really absurd mania, so much so that the most educated and best instructed class of the Egyptians, the priests and scribes, appears to have taken a delight in replacing good old Egyptian words with Semitic terms like the following: Rosh, head; Sar, king; Bait, house; Bab, door; Bir, spring; Berkata, lake; Ketem, gold; Shalom, to greet; Ram, to be high; Barak, to bless, and many others, while Sharma was the peaceful greeting. So if they replace it with Shalom, yeah. This Semitic immigration spread so widely that it led to the formation of a mixed people who have held their ground firmly in the same parts till the present day. The Egyptians even proceeded to enrich their theology with the entities of new and foreign origin. At the head of all stood the half Egyptian and half Semitic entity of Set, or Setek, with the surname of Nub, gold, who was universally considered as the representative and king of the foreign entities in the land of Mazor. In his essence, a primitive Egyptian creation, Set gradually became the contemporary representative of all foreign countries and as a god of the foreigners. In mentioning the names of Baal and Astarte, so frequently met with in the inscriptions. I have brought this up in my like the Goetia series. Goetia, to use the Greek term. There's other variations of Goetia that you could say. It is scarcely necessary to point out that both of the origin Phoenician theology, as at Sidon, so likewise in Memphis, the warlike Astarte had their own temple, and usually pronounced with a ah in the front instead of just plain a. But although less frequently mentioned in the preceding Semitic entities, places were assigned in the Egyptian pantheon to the fierce Reshpu, Lord of the Long Times, the King of Eternity, the Lord of Strength in the midst of the host of who are considered to be gods, and who's to be considered a goddess? Kedesh. And to Bes, also the patron of song and music and pleasure and social delights. I've done a program on Bes Beset, but the Phoenician Anka and the Syrian Anaites are also recognized therein under the names of Anka and Anta. Semitic influence in Egypt may also be seen in the peculiar chronology adopted on the celebrated memorial of stone of Tanis, erected in the reign of Ramessu II. Contrary to the custom of giving dates according to the day, month, and year of the reigning king, this stone offers the only example as yet discovered of a foreign system of chronology, mention being there made of the year 400 of King Nub, a Hyksos prince. Well, I don't think he lived 400 years, but the monuments also attest to the presence of these foreign families on Egyptian soil, as the following letter will show. I will now pass to something else which will give satisfaction to the heart of my lord, namely to the report to him, that we have permitted the races of the Shasu of the land of Aduma to pass through the fortress of Ketam, of the king Meneptah, Hatep, Hemat, life, health, and strength be to him, which is situated in the land of Succoth, near the lakes of the city of Pithom, of King Meneptah, Hatep, Hemaat, which is situated in the land of Succoth, to nourish themselves and to feed their cattle on the property of Pharaoh, who is a gracious son for all nations. Yeah, Pharaoh really overshoots himself, right? But people end up believing the ridiculous things that their leaders say without thinking. This extreme important document of the time of Meneptah the second, the son of Ramessu the second, refers to those Shasu tribes, or Badawi, who inhabited the great desert between Egypt and the land of Canaan, and extended their wanderings as far sometimes as the Euphrates. According to the monuments, they belonged to the great race of the Amu, of which they were in fact the representatives, as in the neighborhood of the city of Ramessu and the town of Pithom, the Semitic population formed the main stock of the inhabitants of remote antiquity. So the neighborhood of Ba'ilas was peopled by strangers who had pitched their tents in the sight of the cultivated land where they found pasture for their cattle. They were Badawi, who had in all probability migrated from the dreary region near the town of Suez. Meneptah II, the son and successor of Ramessu II, gives at Karnak a graphic account of the dangerous character of these unbidden guests. When he succeeded to the throne, the danger of a sudden invasion on this side appeared all the more threatening, inasmuch as that on the west, the Libyans suddenly passed the frontiers of Kamet and extended predatory incursions into the heart of the populous and cultivated western nomes of the Delta. According to the inscription of victory, Meneptah II saw himself obliged to take needful precautions for the safety of the land. The capitals of On and Memphis were therefore provided with the necessary fortifications, as the foreigners had pitched their ahil or tents before the town of Ba'ilas, and such. Before noticing the remaining neighbors of the Egyptians of the Delta who carried on war or traffic with the inhabitants of Kemet, we must refer to the administration of affairs and to the regulation of trade with the foreign people. One portion of these consisted of the industrial population settled in the towns and villages, another portion served as soldiers or sailors, others again were employed in the public works, the mines and quarries. Over each division the foreigners was placed the harpet or steward. His next superior was the commandant of the district or Adon, the Semitic form of this title, while as the chief authority, the Ab, a pharaoh or royal vizier, issued orders in the name of the sovereign. I don't remember the Egyptian way of saying it, but it's done with the the Usur thing. The Usur, Usur, Usus, the Usur, yeah, the bull penis thing. Okay, bull penis on a stick. Yeah, it's a weird one that is. The control over the foreign people lay in the hands of special bailiffs. It's dried, by the way. Maza'e, whose duty it was to preserve public order in the principal cities, and who were under the orders of an our commander, to whom also the erection of public buildings was not unfrequently committed. Among the people of Palestine, well, that's not really what they called themselves, but who held the most active intercourse with Egyptians of earlier times, communication and trade and that sort of thing, were the Kar, in whom may be recognized the Phoenicians. They carried on a brisk trade with Egypt, and seem to have been a people who held in esteem and consideration slaves from Kar, being a much desired merchandise, procured by distinguished Egyptians at a high price, either for their own houses or for the service of the Egyptian entities. A strong city of Zawan seems to have been a primeval habitation of the Phoenicians, since Zawan-Tanis formed an important center for intercourse with the rest of Egypt. The name of Zor, as well as Zawan, is a reminder of the celebrated Zor Tyre. The importance of these people culminates in the fact that a Phoenician named Aresu, towards the end of the 19th dynasty, was able to make himself master of the throne of Egypt. The Kar spoke their own language, Phoenician, which is the only foreign tongue mentioned on the monuments with a distinct reference to its importance. Whoever lived in Egypt spoke Egyptian. Whoever stayed in the south had to speak the language of the Nahasu, or dark-colored people. Wow. That kind of relates to the Nasu, of the poison entity of the Persians, right? Well, a lot of cultures considered whatever foreigners, and yeah, the African countries didn't really totally get along or something. They all kind of, particularly when you went from one race to another, which Africa has more races than any other subspecies, any other region. The Europeans don't have as many races. The Asians don't have as many races. And almost combined, including like the Australians or something, kind of, but you do get more races when you combine everybody else in the world. But anyways, those who went northward to the Asiatic region had to be acquainted with the language of the Phoenicians in order to converse at all intelligibly with inhabitants of the country. The latest descendants of the old race may be seen today in the same region where their forefathers settled thousands of years ago, and the traveler still meets on the shores of Lake Manzala, near the old district of Ramses and Patham, a race of fishermen and sailors, whose manners and customs, whose historical traditions, and whose ideas on religious matters characterize them as foreigners. They are the same whom the Arab writers mention sometimes as Biamites, sometimes as Bashmirites, names whose origin is unknown. The Bashmirite dialect of the Coptic language is a kind of peasants' patois, containing a large number of ancient Semitic words. What, however, forms the most characteristic mark of their foreign descent is their non-Egyptian countenance, as if borrowed from the pictures of the Hyksos, with the broad cheekbones and defiantly pouting lips. Now, in the Aramea, or Biblical Hebrew, or whatever as people were going to call it, or whatever form of Aramaic at the time, it's not as precise as Arabic. But even Arabic kind of, you have different languages going through. You got the ancient Egyptian languages. You've got the some Coptic and Greek and stuff mixing their way in. The Northern Semitic languages make their way in. The Aramea is basically the Northern Semitic language. And every language is really a hodgepodge of older languages, right? It's not just changes or corruptions on some older language, but I'm going to leave off here, and chapter 6 is going to be the Hyksos. So